All right, everyone, the red light is on and we're recording. This is Mark back for another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's an interview episode where I'm interviewing a veteran about their life and career after the military, on an effort to help you if you're still in or maybe recently transitioned, try to figure out what to do with yourself once you can put your hands back in your pockets, grow your beard out, and put on these things called quote unquote civilian clothes. This is a show for you. Show you what are the options that are out there and how you might go about pursuing your post-military life. Okay. I am beyond pumped for today's guest. Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit longer intro on who he is. And normally I pass it right off to the guest to introduce himself. But today's guest is a really important person in veterans affairs. Okay. So his name is Paul Rieckhoff. And many of you probably already know who Paul is. And if you don't, well, I'm going to let you know. So one, he is the host of the Angry Americans podcast. He's the author of Chasing Ghosts and How to Fight. Chasing Ghosts was a book that I read and absolutely loved when I was a cadet in college. He's the founder and president of Righteous Media, the founder of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans America. He's been on the cover of Time magazine. He was named number 37 on GQ's 50 most powerful people in DC. And I think really cool too, Rolling Stone named him to the list of the quiet ones, 12 leaders who get things done. And he's currently a professor at Amherst College. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be as career focused as the show normally is. We're talking about a lot of things, veteran-related, politics, national security. It's going to be a pretty wide-ranging episode of the stuff that Paul's involved in, which is a lot. So, Paul, super pumped to have you to the show. Welcome. Take a minute, introduce yourself, and let everyone know who you are.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Mark. You're kicking ass, and it's awesome to be on your show. I'm a fan and really appreciate and I'm grateful for what you're doing with this show. And your transition out of the military is off to a pretty good start. So, you know, you're living proof of what we've been preaching for decades, that veterans are not a charity, they're an investment. So someone's made an investment in you, and you're doing great things, and I'm honored and thrilled to be on your show. I think you summarized it. I mean, that was a pretty good intro. We've changed the name of my show in the new year from Angry Americans to Independent Americans.
Excuse me.
It's a good conversation because it's evolved. And part of what we recognized is that, when the new year came around and there was an insurrection and there was, frankly, a bit of a problem with the perception of veterans nationally and even internationally, I felt like it was important to shift from anger, which I think is important and something worth exploring, because the line used to be, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And that could be about anything from, the situation in Afghanistan to school shootings. But I felt like it was important to emphasize the independence of the show. And that's really been a critical evolution for the show. And for me, just recognizing that part of why we made that shift is because I don't have a political home. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm an independent. And I also didn't have a home in the media. So that's part of why I started Righteous, is because I think, like many veterans, but not only veterans, Fox is on one side and MSNBC is on the other side. And a lot of us are somewhere in the middle. And I wanted to create an independent, politically unaffiliated media company that could explore that and give voice to a lot of veterans projects and veterans adjacent projects. So we're talking about national security, we're talking about foreign policy, but we're also talking about maybe a part that you didn't have in my bio, which is parenthood.
Yeah.
I'm the dad of two young boys. I got a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old that are just the most amazing and exhilarating and exhausting human beings I've ever been around. But that's really maybe my number one job, especially in the pandemic. They've been my focus, my priority, getting them through this time and helping them thrive and succeed. So they're my little, vetrepreneurs. They've been through their own experience, and I'm trying to support them. And I think it's also important for us to explore, how do you juggle family and entrepreneurship? How do you juggle transition from the military and your social life? And really, I think especially this week, as we're reflecting on the loss of Colin Powell, thinking about what really, really matters. And for me, now that I'm getting older, I'm not just out of the military. I look at you and I think, shit, I'm getting old. The family is what's most important to me, right. And what I'm actually also really interested in talking about and exploring and sharing whatever lessons learned I can with anyone who's listening.
Yeah, and just for some time context for everyone listening, so today we're recording on the 20th of October, and this will be coming out during the week around Veterans Day, so Veterans Week. But yeah, just recently had the loss of Colin Powell. That was a big hit for us. Absolutely just stalwart giant in the veteran defense community. Just someone who very much defined for a lot of people the embodiment of the military ethos and like what a lot of people look up to as far as a veteran. And it's big loss.
And I think
for
defined America too.
Yeah.
For a long time, I used to say that John McCain was the most famous veteran in the world, American veteran in the world. Right. I mean, outside of like Captain America or somebody like that. Right. But I think for the post World War II generation, especially for older folks, for my parents, for my, grandparents, you really had, two generals that were the next generation of the most famous generals, right? In the legacy of Eisenhower and Patton, you had Norman Schwarzkopf and you had Colin Powell. They were the face of the first Gulf War, and then really became the face of the American military for a generation. And, as Colin Powell transitioned into Secretary of State, I think a great example of how you can transition from the military into civilian life. And, George Washington said once that when we assumed the soldier, we did not lay aside the citizen.
Right.
And there's still an obligation, I think, and a responsibility and an opportunity to serve. And I think that's getting a little bit lost in the shuffle here. I've been not surprised, but disappointed to see folks ripping apart, this part of Colin Powell's life, or in particular, obviously the Iraq War situation.
Yeah.
But when you look at the magnitude of his life, I joined the military in part because I read his biography, I think when I was in high school or in college.
Amazing book. Absolutely amazing book.
And his life story, I think, is a great American journey. And I hope that,
totally.
Over the next few months and years, even, we can celebrate that. There's a lot of talk now about changing the names of some of our military bases. And I saw something that said, Fort Benning is one that needs to be changed or maybe changed. And I can think of nobody better to name it after than a guy who used to be a young infantry lieutenant, Colin Powell,
right.
Who came through the public school system, son of immigrants, and went from being a door-kicking infantryman at Fort Benning to, chairman of the Joint Chiefs and Secretary of State. So, I think it's relevant to our conversation and to your show. There's a lot of ways to transition successfully, and look at Colin Powell for a lot of inspiration and an understanding that there's a lot of ways to continue to serve when you put the uniform on the shelf.
Yeah. One of the consistent themes I try and put out there the show is, no matter if you do 3 years or 30 years, eventually you're going to be leaving. Okay. And most likely you're going to be leaving at a point in your life where you're still going to have a lot of years left. You could very well enlist when you're 18 years old, retire at 38, and you still got a lot of life ahead of you. So whatever you think of, your post-military life, it's coming for you one way, shape, form, fashion, or the other. And so best to think about, what can I do after that service and how can I contribute back? Because eventually that uniform is going to come off and you're going to have to do something else afterwards.
Yeah. And you can think about it this way too. I describe this to civilian friends, especially. It's kind of like a stint in the NFL, right? Like maybe you do 20 years and you're Brett Favre, right? Or maybe you blow your knee out in a preseason game and you're done, right? But either way, you're probably done before you're 45, right? Even if you're a general, you're probably out by 55 or 65. So you got a lot of life left to live. And I think that's the opportunity of being in military service, is you have that foundational training and understanding and experience. And that can, if you use it and are thoughtful about it, just like an NFL player, some people get out of the NFL, they never do anything else. Some people get out of the military and they never do anything else because they can't move past that experience. Yeah. But if you can harness it and build on it, then you can become, a great success in many other. You can be, the Michael Strahan of veterans here when you get out.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for my ESPN contract to go be a commentator or, get my own TV show or something that hasn't come yet. Still, checking my email daily to see that and everything.
Well, you know what, man? This is how it starts. I mean, it's a really important, you and I are in the media business now, and that's an important place where I think the civil military divide is really stark. There aren't too many veterans who have TV shows. There's almost none. Right. Yeah. And that's a real problem when you talk about issues like Afghanistan or, the National Guard deploying to wildfires or covering issues like the vaccination of the military. You have to have that cultural understanding. And, there's really the only person I can think about is like Pete Hegseth is on Fox. He doesn't have his own show. Pat Murphy used to have a show on MSNBC. Jocko's got a great podcast. But if you look at traditional media, there was a generation of, the World War II vets and some folks who have been exposed to Vietnam, but there aren't too many of our voices in the media. And I think that's changing, especially on a lot of writers at the Washington Post and folks like CJ Chivers and so many others that have done well on the reporting side. and even now moving into TV and radio. But we need those people who represent us in the same way Colin Powell did. So I'd love it for it to be you, man, especially when they're covering like the Army Navy game, right? Like it's like having a bunch of people covering the Army Navy game and nobody's been in the service. They could fly you in for that one, man.
Yeah. All right, Paul. So to kind of provide a frame of reference for everybody, what'd you do in the military?
When I first enlisted, I enlisted in 1998. I was an enlisted MP. So went into basic training in Fort McClellan,
we won't
Alabama.
Hold that against too much on the show. It's okay.
What's that?
I said we won't hold it too much against you on the show. Don't worry about it.
Well, I kind of got all those bases covered because I started out, enlisted as an MP, and then fast forward, went to OCS and then got my commission as an infantry officer. So I had a, really kind of a zigzaggy pre and post 9/11 experience, especially because I was in New York and I was in the New York National Guard for a bit, and most of us got activated for 20 years ago right now. So my first activation, if you will, was at Ground Zero on 9/11. That was the first time I ever got, active duty pay and hazard duty pay. And I wouldn't have predicted it because I just got my commission that June. But I went through the Guard, I went through the reserves, I was on active duty and then got out after my platoon leader time in Iraq, and then started IAVA soon after and started my transition. But it was when I look back on it, it was challenging, but also probably not unusual for folks who were in the Guard and reserve in that immediate post 9/11 period, where a lot of folks went on active duty, went on state orders, kind of got bounced around the system. And for me, it was useful because I got to see all sides of it. Right, I got to see active duty 3rd ID, and then I got to see, New York National Guard on a bridge and tunnel deployment. I got to see all of it, and that was really helpful in every aspect of my life afterward.
Yeah, so I definitely want to talk about IAVA. So you kind of leave the military full time here and everything, and then you saw a need to create an organization. Okay, now there are a number of, there's a gazillion veteran-related organizations out there. Why did you think there needed to be another one, and why this kind of specific focus?
Well, there are a gazillion now, but there weren't a gazillion in 2004.
Okay.
So we were almost like the Facebook of veterans groups, right? There had been MySpace, there had been some other stuff out there. But really you had the legacy organizations that were, the VFW, the American Legion. And this is the way I really frame it up. The bricks and mortars, traditionally business, and this is a business show, right? Like their business was bricks and mortars. We were internet, right? So they were Borders, we were Amazon, right? And so when we came in 2004, there actually wasn't anything. There was the Gulf War Veterans Association that was started by a guy named Steve Robinson. You had the traditional VSOs that had nobody from our generation. So that's really why we started it, was because every generation of veterans, I think, has needs and creates its own voice. So maybe the best comp for us was VVA, the Vietnam Veterans of America, who similarly came home and they weren't accepted by the traditional VSOs. There was a real divide there. People don't know that history, but there was some real friction there among the World War II generation and the Vietnam generation. And similarly for us, we just felt like we were best suited to talk about our issues. And at that time, it was stuff like body armor, how the National Guard was being deployed, whether or not there was an insurgency, and you couldn't go to a Vietnam vet because he had been out for 30 years.
Right.
So especially, frankly, when we dug into issues like women in combat, what are women facing? At IAVA, our population, our membership was, I think, probably close to 25% female or 30% female when I got out, which is maybe even higher than the military. But the other VSOs had almost nobody. They had women's auxiliaries. So for us, it was really about creating a platform, and it was Web 1.0. It was a website called operationtruth.org, which is where veterans could literally post their stories.
Yeah.
And it was before Facebook, right? Really took off. So that was a place where you could share stories. And that sharing became the focal point for, hey, I need a job. I'm in Kansas City. Oh, I'm in Miami. I know a guy. Or it could be, hey, could you help me get through the VA? Or does anybody know if this employer is good with veterans or not? It was crowdsourcing. And that was really the kernel that I saw that was the special part of what made IAVA necessary. And then make it powerful was that we were able to pull together hundreds of thousands of post 9/11 veterans to connect, unite, and empower. And, that spanned advocacy, like passing the GI Bill that now over 1 million folks have used. and case management programs that help veterans who are, struggling with mental health or trying to find a job. But at its core, it was always about community, and it's still about community and about being a platform for voices from, yours to mine to everybody in between, especially when those voices, like we've talked about in the media, are so rare. But they're also rare in boardrooms. They're rare in school boards. And again, I think I'll go back to where I started. Veterans are not a charity. They're an investment, but they're an opportunity. And the more veterans we have in boardrooms and on school boards and in Congress and everywhere else, I think the better off America is going to be.
Totally agree. I was recently interviewing someone, Barrett Bogue, and so he spent like 9 years working in the VA, kind of mostly focused on GI Bill issues. I remember asking him, what has been the return on investment on the GI Bill? And, this isn't necessarily hard research. This is like an older report, and they're kind of redoing it for like the post 9/11 and everything. And I was expecting him to tell me maybe $2 for every $1. I was like, that seems reasonable. He was like, it's $7.
Yep, it's 8-1. 8-1 was the number we used. $8 to the national economy for every dollar invested. Jim Webb, and we were deep in that, man. It's one of my proudest, I think, parts of my 14 years at IAVA is, we were really instrumental in getting that done. And there was opposition. This was long ago. It was 2008. People were saying, oh, it's an election year. Oh, it's too partisan. Oh, it's too expensive. And we had to go in and make a case for why we needed a GI Bill to send, guys and gals that would come behind us to college. And we had Jim Webb, who was a Democrat and a Vietnam vet, and John Warner, who was a Republican and a World War II vet. And they were like a two-pronged attack. And Jim Webb used to always say, the U.S. government will not waste a single dollar that goes in a veteran's head. If you put dollars in veterans' heads, good things come out.
Right.
And you're living proof of that and so many other people. But I think it's important for folks to know that didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen by momentum. It was because veterans, and a lot of World War II veterans too, went with us and walked the halls of Congress to make that case. And I think in the end, Mark, that might be the single best case for veteran entrepreneurship, for veteran-owned businesses, for veterans as an opportunity, is just look at what the GI Bill did for our nation, for our economy, for diplomacy, for everything. If you invest in these men and women, they're going to do great things. And whether that's a small media startup or it's a national program for education, that's an investment we have to continue to make the case for.
I absolutely agree. And, if you listen to the show, I plug the GI Bill all the time. My grandfather went to school in the GI Bill. My dad went to school in the GI Bill. I'm going to school in the GI Bill right now. You have the GI Bill, use it. It's an amazing, amazing resource. And you can use it for college.
I know this too, if I can, Mark. There's a part, the GI Bill is not done. Right. The GI Bill is never done because it has to evolve and adapt, improvise, and overcome. It's got to continue to evolve to meet the needs of veterans. And let me put a point on something that I think is important, relevant to your audience, especially. We've been pushing for a long time for people who have excess GI Bill to be able to use it for a small business.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of folks who are colleged out or don't want to go to college or have a degree, and they have GI Bill benefits that they can't access. And as someone who is now an entrepreneur who has navigated, the process of raising capital, I still go through that process now. What I see consistently is we don't need any more resume workshops. Right, we've had enough damn resume workshops. Right. We've had enough corporations saying, oh, I want some token veterans. And there's a lot of that tokenism, I think, that's out there. Like, we need the resources to succeed, and that's education, but it's also access to capital. And right now, if you're a small business and you don't, maybe you don't own your own house, and maybe you don't have a big credit card, and you don't know a lot of rich people, but you got a good business idea, I think all of us listening have to advocate for and simultaneously create a market where we can have veterans' ideas supported. And the easiest way, in my view, would be to allow for transferability in the GI Bill. Billions of dollars are just sitting there. The government's collecting interest. We can create a system that's fair and smart, but having veterans access that, especially after COVID, when there's so much entrepreneurship happening, it could be a restaurant, it could be a solar business. If veterans have access to that capital, that's going to be another 8, 9, 10-1 return for the national economy.
Yeah, totally agree. And for everyone listening, just a couple of weeks ago, I published an article on my website about 15 different ways you can access capital as a veteran from different, veteran-focused venture capital groups or investors or angel associations, whatever it is, who are looking to invest in veterans. So there are some companies out there that are seeing that veterans have poor access to capital, and they're trying to do something about it. And additionally, I know there is a bill being pushed by Ben Klein, so he's the represents the 6th District of Virginia, to try and get exactly what you're talking about, open up those entrepreneurial opportunities for the GI Bill. So Paul, you ran IVA for a long time. You were there for like 15 plus years, right?
Yeah, 14 years.
Yeah.
14 years.
Can you talk a little bit about your decision to leave? Because I'm sure that was this was something you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into, and spent years working on, and a lot of super important stuff. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to say, I move on to something else?
Yeah, maybe our earlier comparison is a good one. Like, let's say it's not just the NFL, but like, I did a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears in a really important thing. It was a lot like leaving the military. How long do you stay? When do you go? When's the right time? What do you do next? But for me, I think there were a couple of factors. It'd been 14 years, and 14 years in the nonprofit space is hard.
Yeah.
And it was hard on my family. I used to say it was like 14 deployments because, you're working on really important issues. You're working long hours. You got a lot of dedicated people, but the pay is not great.
Right.
I didn't have a big 401k or stock options. My family didn't see me a lot. And also there was a new generation coming up that was really good and was ready. And I felt like I was in a place where I could transition to the board and be more effective. A guy who was my number 2, Jeremy Butler, Navy vet. He's still in the Naval Reserves as a commander now, had worked with me for a couple of years serving as our operations chief and knew the whole business and how everything operated. He was ready. In some ways, I was in his way. So I felt like we had, a good foundation. We had a lot of momentum. We had a good plan going forward. And I wanted to do other things. And it was at a time where I saw what was happening in America, and I was deeply concerned. And I needed to be able to spread my wings as an entrepreneur, but also as a voice on this landscape. Because when I ran IAVA, you kind of speak for a constituency.
Right.
You do speak for a constituency. You try to channel a constituency and raise their voices. I wanted to be able to say whatever I want and do whatever I want with my vision without being bound to a membership, which is part of the job. So it was kind of like similarly running for Congress. You have to represent your constituents. If you don't represent those constituents anymore, you have more free latitude to focus on the issues that you're passionate about, the way you want to talk about things. And also at that time, I saw the division that was happening, the extremism that was rising, the divide in our media, the divide in our partisan politics. And I felt like there were really only 2 places for me to make an impact and continue to evolve. It was either, going into something that was independent in politics, and there really wasn't anything there. And I'm not a billionaire. I don't know Mike Bloomberg, so I can't go that route. And I'm not going to run for office because of many of the same reasons. Or the media space that I felt was really vital to helping or hurting America. And I felt like that was a place where I had a lot of experience at IAVA. I had produced shows and documentaries and been on almost every show in the country. I had written, I had done books. And I said, I have this skill set. I still have an entrepreneurial spirit, and I want to build something that matters. And so I left IAVA, transitioned to the board. Jeremy took over, left him in a good spot. He's taken it to levels even higher. And then it was a pretty quick succession. I left IAVA. My second son was born, which was critical because that's the most entrepreneurial thing you'll ever do. And then I started Righteous a couple months later. And now it's a new startup. It has all the, similar challenges and opportunities. But I say a lot, I have 2 sons and a third child, which is my business. Right. And my wife also has her own business. So it's like having 4 kids, and they're young and they're exciting, but they're also exhausting and demanding and unpredictable. And it's a fun place to be in, but it's also challenging in this COVID environment. But all that is to say, I'm really proud of what IAVA has done, all the people that have been a part of it, and I'm even more proud about what's coming next. They are talking about the most important issues, everything from burn pits to battling extremism, to even helping people understand something like the passing of Colin Powell, or what does Veterans Day mean. IAVA has a vital voice. If folks are listening and they're not members, it's free. Go check them out and watch Jeremy and Caitlin and Tom and this amazing team of folks that are out there fighting the good fight. But they can't do it alone. It's a team game, and they need everybody involved.
I want to get specifically into some of the topics that you touch on in your show and on Twitter and everything. So you mentioned extremism. Are you talking about Islamic extremism, or are you talking about something here at home?
I'm talking about both.
Yeah.
I'm talking about all of it. I mean, I have argued that extremism and, maybe related, shifts to totalitarianism is one of the biggest threats, if not the biggest threat to the global security. And so here at home, I think domestic extremism is the number one national security threat. It looks like the Pentagon agrees, the president agrees. And if you don't think so, well, a bunch of people almost took over the Capitol, 10, 11 months ago. So that looks pretty extreme to me. And as a guy who deployed after 9/11, who was there at Ground Zero, that was the most immediate threat then. There was a threat of extremism that wanted to do harm in the U.S. and abroad, but now we've got a different threat from within. And so I think combating that, educating people, giving them options, and recognizing that, look, my kid is more likely to get shot by a lone wolf extremist or someone who wants to, blow up the local city hall or just on a public transportation than he is by, ISIS-K. Or a North Korean missile, or a Russian spy. So that's the most immediate threat. Parallel track is probably COVID, right, and public health issues. So that's why I think it's so important. And again, I think veterans are in the driver's seat. We can change that. We can push against it. We can fight for America just like we always have. But sometimes that might mean letting somebody know if a buddy of yours is gone off the deep end and got recruited by the Oath Keepers or something else extreme that might want to do us all harm. So I think it's a really precarious time, especially for the veterans community. And we've also got to shape that, yes, some veterans were a part of the insurrection, but that's not us, right? Colin Powell is more of us than someone who tried to kick the door in the Capitol and throw crap on the wall in, Nancy Pelosi's office. We've got to help shape that. And being in the media, I think I have an opportunity to do that. So we've talked to people like Admiral James Stavridis. I've talked to people like Admiral Mike Mullen. But then I've also talked to folks like Wes Chatham, who's on The Expanse, who was in the Navy 15 years ago. I brought Montel Williams and Jane Horton.
Show, by the way. Absolutely love The Expanse.
Yeah. But that that's a great story too, right? Wes Chatham is a Navy guy on an aircraft carrier who wants to be an actor, and Denzel Washington shows up and he puts him in the movie, and now Wes is a big movie star. So it's a great story. But those stories are important to tell. So that's why I wanted to go into media. I wanted to be able to tell those stories. And that we're doing that through podcasts. We're doing it through videos. We're doing it through documentaries. We've got a national security series that's running on Vice this fall called While the Rest of Us Die. I'm a consulting producer. I'm a contributor. And I want to keep a focus on national security, on military affairs, on combat, on veterans. Like right now, most of America is not paying attention to what's happening in Afghanistan. Yeah. Righteous media is focusing on Afghanistan. We will keep that focus on Afghanistan. We'll keep the focus on burn pits, and we'll keep the focus on other issues too. But I think it's a really important time to be in and around the media, and that's why I jumped in, and that's what we're focused on.
Can you talk a little bit? So we talked about extremism in the military. Can you talk about what are some other internal factors that are going on in the military that you think are of national concern?
I think the military is always a reflection of society. And that's important for me to shape, right? As someone who studies this and thinks about this and has lived in this for almost 20 years. And I'm not, the ambassador from Planet Veteran, but I've been there a lot. And so I can help interpret that for people. I think all the divisions and issues that are facing America are also facing our military, but it's much more urgent. Because let's use COVID as an example, right? If you got a bunch of people who are fighting about whether or not they want to get the vaccine, if you're sitting around a Starbucks or in your local bar, that's one thing. If you're in a Navy SEAL unit together, that's something different. Yeah. Right. And it's about force protection. It's about readiness. It's about the integrity of our nation. And so just as an example, I think everybody should get the vaccine. I think the Secretary of Defense agrees because, do you want to be in an aircraft with 8 people and one of them isn't vaccinated? That person is vulnerable. You didn't have the option of not wearing your helmet when you got on that aircraft. I don't think you have the option of not getting the vaccine, but that is an issue, whether you agree with me or not, that is impacting the military right now. Right. And similarly, extremism is, and similarly, racism is, and similarly, economic challenges, right? Where you've got businesses closing because of COVID, all that does impact the military. So I think it's important, but maybe the most important thing right now, Mark, is that the military kind of gets forgotten, right? Like Afghanistan for 3 weeks, me and lots of other people are on TV, and then we're gone because the country has shifted. So we have to constantly remind people that the military is a part of us and a part of them. and that it is impacted and impacting every single thing that happens in this country in ways that are positive and sometimes negative. But the reckonings that are happening on everything from Black Lives Matter to COVID to what to do about Afghanistan are all interconnected to the military.
Yeah, totally agree. And if for everyone listening again to, if you listen to the weekly sit rep, so Kyle and I, we do our weekly news hour, and we've both been very open about encouraging people, go get the vaccine. Okay. I've got it. Super happy that I got it. Strongly encourage everyone who's out there listening. If you haven't got it, go get it. Okay. Those are the final words on it. All right.
Yeah. And I'm going to use this comparison because I think it's an important one.
Yeah.
When I was a platoon leader, I couldn't walk into my battalion commander and say, "Hey, sir, I don't think I'm going to wear my Kevlar and helmet today."
Right.
He'd say, "Okay, give me your rank, give me your platoon, go to the brig." But for some reason here, people think that there should be an opportunity to make yourself vulnerable. So in the same way, if I went out with no helmet and got my head, hit, they'd have to carry my body around. You're going to have to carry your buddy around if he gets hit with COVID in your helicopter or on your deployment or anywhere else. And look, there's plenty of places where you have choices and you can do your own thing.
Yeah.
The military is generally not one of them, right? Like, you can go somewhere else and go do that. And that's well within your rights. But in the military, you got to do certain things because it makes us all better. And that's a part of this that I don't think folks have understood. If that's not right for you, okay, there's plenty of other places that are hiring that won't make you get the vaccine. Best of luck to you.
Yeah. And I always think it's crazy too. I mean, like, I think of how much shit I was shot up with, like you get in a line and someone just pumps you full, like left after right. You don't even know what you're getting half the time. You're just like, sure, open up the arm and shove it in there, man. We'll see what goes. We'll see what happens. Right. And then all of a sudden people are getting up in arms about this now. And
and also think about how many countries we deploy to where the vaccination rates are low.
Right.
You deploy to a country and let's say, in Kenya where the vaccination rate's like 9%. Okay, so 91% of the people in that country are unvaccinated. And if you're on the ground there, you're vulnerable. So I think it's shaken out. And I think it's also a good chance, frankly, to get people who aren't team players out of the military. Be self-selecting. Because if you don't want to wear your helmet, if you don't want to do what everybody else is doing, if you want to be an individual, that's great. There's lots of places for you. The military is not one of them.
Oh, yeah. So, Paul, I want to shift a little bit. So one of the things I really appreciate about your message is you're not afraid to be both supportive and openly critical of our politicians and our national leaders. I've seen you, one day support someone and the next day say, this guy's an idiot. This is a bad call or something. Can you talk about the responsibility of individual Americans to voice their opinions in today's, very politically charged environment?
Yeah, I think it was Mark Twain that said, "I love my country always and my government when it deserves it."
Yeah.
So I think that it's an important time for veterans to reclaim the mantle of patriotism in a positive way. I'm not talking about cannibalizing patriotism or, just a pet peeve of mine, like personalizing the American flag for your individual issue, right? Like that's just something that I was raised was not appropriate. And when I came up the military, it wasn't like, hey, if you want to change the colors on the stripes or change the, you just, it's not a whiteboard. It's the American flag. So for me, I think it's a really important time for people to put country first and community first and understand that politicians have a job to do and they are accountable to all of us. And George Washington himself warned against the division of parties. He warned against factionism. He warned about tribalism. And there are plenty of people now who, are Republicans or Democrats first and Americans second. So I think we've got to challenge all of these politicians on everything, always. If George Washington himself were president and he, screwed up Afghanistan like Biden did, I would be critical of him too. And similarly, if Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or anyone else is doing right or wrong by veterans or on other issues that are important, I think we have a responsibility and an opportunity. This is America. You have a voice. You should use it. But as a veteran, I think it's important for folks to understand that voice is often co-opted by politicians, by charlatans, by people who stand up in front of a wall of veterans and say, "I speak for all of them," and they all don't want the vaccine or they all want the vaccine. It's much more complicated than that. So I think everybody has a really important role to play in holding people accountable and hopefully even running for office, whether it's, dog catcher or president. We think about this, Mark. The Vietnam veterans never had a Vietnam veteran in the White House.
Yeah.
It was really probably the only generation, Gulf War as an outlier, where someone who had served in the defining conflict of a generation did not serve in the White House. John McCain came close.
Right.
John Kerry came close. But I think we will see 1, 2, maybe 3 presidents in the decades to come who served in the post 9/11 era. And I think that is important so they understand it. And right now, when so few politicians understand it, so few politicians have served, we have an outsized responsibility to be involved. And we also are pragmatic. Like, we can work together. Like, you get a bunch of vets together who, a bunch of civilians might not be able to get together to fix a playground. You get a bunch of us together, we'll figure that shit out. Like, we'll get together, we'll run logistics, we'll make things happen. And I think that's something that's very important in understanding when times are tough. You need tough people who know how to make things happen. And those are often veterans. They're not only veterans, but they are often veterans, and America needs them now to include in politics, where a lot of other folks, are willing to serve or willing to go into politics because so many others won't. We need people involved in these conversations that are determining the future of our country. That's what every generation of veterans has done in America, and we can't sit this one out.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. And actually, I have a really good friend who's here at UVA with me. He's still in the Army. He's going to go teach at West Point after this, and he's working on his PhD. And his thesis is entirely focused around this of like, what is the impact of veterans in office, and like, is it good or bad, and like, are they actually better at working across party lines? And so, super pumped for that paper to be done. I can't wait to see his results from it, because he's a super smart guy, and I'm sure he's going to come up with some good stuff from it. So Paul,
we also need values too, Mark, if I can. Like, this is true for business, right? Like, I like veteran-owned businesses because they have values. They've been taught about values. Most veteran-owned businesses have thought about values, right? So when you're talking about corruption or fraud or just stress of business, I have 2 boys. I know if they work for a veteran-owned business, that's going to be a place that has an ethos, that has some values. And then you've got the upside of like people who are pre-screened for drug problems and,
right,
mental health issues, and they have a network. There's a lot of competitive advantages that I think are important for us to highlight right now too, but values and a collective shared sense of purpose. If you meet a vet who served 40 years ago, you have some level of connection. And I think that connection is America. And that's a powerful thing for us to build on.
Yeah, very mature. So I just had Jerry Flanigan on the show. So he runs J-Dog Junk Removal. He's got like over 250 franchises nationwide. He's just absolutely crushing it. Okay. And after he left the Army, he didn't really identify, he didn't like self-proclaim himself as a veteran. Like, that was not just part of his identity. He didn't, start veteran-owned businesses and everything. And then when he started J-Dog, it initially started just as like a generic junk removal. And then like, as he started showing up to people's houses and delivering great services, they were like, "Are you a vet, man?" And he was like, yeah, I am. And he started realizing that actually brought him more business for all the reasons you just said, where people recognized there was a sense of values and the things we took up from the military of showing up on time, showing up in a clean uniform, of being respectful to people, of doing the job and everything. People recognize that and they want it. And it is something that can help separate veteran-owned businesses in a big way. So totally agree with you there.
Yeah. And look, like, I hope if you haven't had him on already, you have Jake Wood on, who founded Team Rubicon, right? Team Rubicon
on my wish list. Yeah.
Well, we'll make that happen, right? Like, he's great, but he comes in and says, okay, we're built for disasters. It's a nonprofit that brings veterans into disaster zones. So whether it's clearing routes or helping people with medical issues, or now distributing the vaccine and helping rebuild homes, like, okay, do you want, someone who just got hired 6 weeks ago, or do you want someone who did, 10 years in the Marine Corps? That person, is ready for that challenge and has been tested and trained. And I think that's really important. And also, let me give you we did a lot of corporate partnerships when I was at IAVA. And early on, we did a partnership with Uber, right? And Uber was having a problem with trustworthy drivers. People didn't feel safe with drivers. Well, look, if you got a vet driving, maybe you feel a little bit safer because, they've been screened, they've been trained. But also, if like the tire goes out, or it gets really rainy, or something crazy happens to your vehicle while you're on your way to the airport or to your mom's house, that man or woman is probably more likely to be able to handle it. And I think that's a differentiating factor. I keep saying this. We're built for times like this.
Yeah.
This COVID environment is crazy. It's dynamic, but we're built for this. And that's why I'm betting on veterans and veteran-owned businesses, especially right now.
Can you talk a little bit? I want to shift to give you a chance to talk about Righteous Media. can you talk about like the first 6 months of like what standing that up looked like? I love having entrepreneurs on the show. I think entrepreneurs just have fantastic stories and there's lots of good lessons in there. So can you talk a bit about like what standing that up looked like?
So it's really my second big entrepreneurial project after IAVA. So I learned a lot the first time. It's like you're raising kids for those who have kids. You learn a lot with your first kid that you use with your second kid or your third kid or your fourth kid. I think the most important thing about my first 6 months is it was before I even started, I wrote a plan. I wrote a plan. And that was really important. I spent a lot of time writing, revising, testing, thinking through a plan. And it was like a giant operations order.
Right.
Like what's the situation? What's the execution all the way through, right? Everybody knows, Sergeant Major eats sugar cookies, right? When you're thinking about writing an op order. So I wrote a plan and I thought through the plan and this is a different kind of plan, right? And instead of, CASEVAC plans, you're thinking about what's your financing plan, what's your accounting plan, what's your hiring plan, but really thinking through the landscape that I was going to enter in the media market and writing a plan on how I was going to build an enterprise that could make an impact. And for me, that's what it was. It's not about getting rich. We want to make money. We will make money. We do make money, but it's really about recruiting for a mission. And this is about disrupting the media environment. This is about creating a home for the people who are homeless. If you feel like MSNBC and Fox have left you behind or that's not your tribe, maybe Righteous Media is. If you're part of the 40% of independents and unaffiliateds in this country that aren't Republicans or Democrats, we're for you. But it's also if you care about cars or whiskey or national security or parenthood. There are going to be a lot of on-ramps into the righteous community, but we're building shows that stand behind values. And we call them the 5 I's. And it's independence, integrity, information, inspiration, and impact. Those 5 I's guide everything we do at Righteous Media and will forever. So we're always going to be independent. We're always going to give you information. We're always going to leave you smarter than before you came. We're not going to be partisan. We're not going to be co-opted. And we're also going to have a good time and bring some energy and spark. You mentioned sports. I think that a lot of the news media feels too much like C-SPAN and not enough like ESPN. So we want to bring some energy and we want to bring some dynamism and make politics and news and culture a bit more accessible in a way that people are kind of turned off. So we want to be more like Barstool or more like The Ringer or more like Joe Rogan. There's a lot of examples out there, and I obviously with caveats, right? Like those examples have had problems, but we want to be a place where people can come because they want an alternative. Barstool is an alternative to ESPN.
Yeah.
Right. And a populist kind of like, I'm sick of this bullshit. I want something better and different that hears me. Well, that's what we want to be for a contrast to everything from the New York Times to Fox News. And we're starting early. We're starting small. But that first 6 months was about getting the sauce right and really thinking about what was our path to success and then starting small, hitting it hard, working it through, and then expanding around that. So my show, Independent Americans, was the flagship. That was the first product. And now we've got other products. We've got a great show called Everybody and Their Mother Has a Podcast. That's about a guy and his mom that were quarantining together, but they've also got a special needs brother. And they talk about what it's like to have a special needs person in your family. They talk about mental health. They talk about cooking. And we just launched a new show called the Firefighters Podcast. In the same way veterans don't have a voice, don't have a medium, firefighters don't either. So we got a great guy named Rob Serra, who's a 9/11 first responder, and he's got the podcast for firefighters. Check it out. That's awesome. Called the Firefighters Podcast with Rob Serra, and he's digging into issues and telling stories like how firefighters are getting sick from their equipment. There's a problem with a lot of firefighting equipment, and firefighters are getting cancer. Sound familiar, vets? Well, that's what firefighters are facing. But Rob also brings inspiration. He tells life stories. His 10-year-old daughter, Frankie, does a cooking segment at the end, so she gives you good recipes. But this is the start. The podcasts are the start. We're doing television. We're doing video. And we want to be a real transformational player on the media space because the media is defining everything right now. And we want to be a part of redefining that in a way that's positive, a way that's uniting, and a way that moves the country forward instead of drags it down and makes it burn.
And people are so hungry for something like that. It's unbelievable to me. I heard, so I think if you don't know, it's really easy to think that, the major news networks get, everybody in America is watching them. And it's just really not the case. I think it was saying MSNBC, even like on their top show, only has like about 1.5 million viewers. And even Fox, which is the number one, has like 2.5 million.
Yeah.
That is a tiny sliver of America that's watching that, because people are they're just sick of this bullshit, and they're just sick of the partisan politics. And like, they want something like this that's going to step in and give them a more independent, more balanced view of what's actually happening out there.
You got it. And Rogan gets 20 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So Rogan will get 20 million listeners. And similarly, what we also want to be is a place where people can come together in a respectful way. Right. Like, people know me. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat who changed his uniform. I've been an independent my whole life. And so I didn't just join this team. Right. And I say a lot of times our folks are like Seattle Supersonics basketball fans. They're in Seattle. They love the NBA. They just don't have a team. And you bring the Supersonics back, they're all going to support the Supersonics. So independent Americans want media opportunities and media choices. And so I'm able to bring in Meghan McCain, and I'm able to bring in Rachel Maddow, right? I'm able to bring in people from both sides of the aisle and bring them together and have a respectful conversation about how they feel about the issues that define us, but also try to find some common ground, because I think we have a lot to learn from each other. And independent doesn't have to mean neutral. It doesn't have to mean watered down. And sometimes it means you have to be even stronger, because it's easy to just say, I'm going to fold and, go with the Democrats or the Republicans or MSNBC or Fox. So even if we are an alternative for 5% of the 40% of Americans who are independent, then we win. We win from a mission standpoint, and we win from a financial standpoint. We win from a business standpoint. And I think we represent what the future of media is.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's so easy to adopt okay, I'm a Republican. Here's the list of things, and I have to check all these blocks, and this is what I'm listening to, and this is what I'm follow. It's way harder to just kind of straddle both sides and say, okay, here's my issue. Here's why I care about this thing. Here's my other issue. Here's why I care about this thing, because it puts the onus on you as the individual to articulate those ideas and be able to defend them against someone, maybe either side of the political party. It's way harder to do than just say, okay, here's my grab bag of the things that I'm just going to blindly support because this is the tribe that I want to identify with.
Yeah. And we also look like, we'll talk about whiskey. We'll talk about cars. I don't have to cut to a Viagra commercial, so I can give people like Admiral Mike Mullen the time and space to talk. I think tone is really important. I think music is really important. I think attitude is really important. People remember the early days of MTV. It was the edit, it was the feel, it was the brand. And then even, the earlier days of Vice, when people felt like Vice was going to be, the next new thing. And I think Vice lost its way. I think a lot of these startups have lost their way, but many of them have also been successful in staying true to what they are. And that's what we're going to do. We'll stay true to what makes Righteous different. We'll stay true to being independent, and we'll stay true to telling great stories. In this new season of While the Rest of Us Die, which is its national security show we're doing on Vice. Vice is our partner on it. They're broadcasting it. We're going to talk about what happens when the shit hits the fan. Last episode, we talked about Raven Rock. Where does Congress and the president go on 9/11? The national security pieces. Where do they actually go? The bunker that they went to. Well, the title is While the Rest of Us Die, because it's an exploration of where the elite go when the shit hits the fan. And that could be COVID, that could be a nuke attack, that could be January 6th. And we're going to pull apart January 6th and talk about what happened there. And that's the kind of content that we're bringing, that has attitude and information and an independent standpoint. And I hope it's just the best of what's yet to come.
Awesome stuff. Well, Paul, we're winding down to the last few minutes of the show. So in a minute, I'm going to pass it back over to you. Just provide any last thoughts, words of wisdom that you impart upon the crowd of people as they're thinking about their post-military life. But before I do, there's a question I always ask my guests. And that's, if you think back to your time in the Army, what was the best and or worst chow hall you ate at?
Whew. Man, that's a good one. So I'm going to answer like an unconventional in an unconventional way. When I was at Ground Zero, I remember at some point somebody brought in steaks.
Heck yeah.
And it was like this weird couple of days after, and this is early, right? Like there were no chow halls. And it was like right after 9/11, and we'd say, okay, we need eye drops. And where we get around, again, early days, really pre-internet. And then you turn around and it'd be like a 7-foot pile of eye drops, because somebody said we need eye drops, and we need tissues, and we need cigarettes, right? There would be like a pile of freaking cigarettes, and you just go over and grab what you need and go back to work. And one point, I don't know, it might have been like Tom Colicchio or some fantastic chef. And we had been there, working hard, and the air was shit and everybody was really, emotionally drained. And at some point somebody brought in steaks, and they were really good. I mean, and steaks are good anytime if you got a steak in the field, right? I mean, everybody remembers that one day you get lobster when you're on deployment or something like that, right? But this was like a New York, like high-end, like $100 steak that you get at Sparks or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And that was a damn good steak. That's
awesome.
That's my first answer.
That's perfect. I love like
I ate it with like a plastic spoon too, which kind of sucks. But maybe I had I probably had my Leatherman on, right? And everybody who's been deployed, when you cut a steak with your or a piece of meat with your Leatherman, but you start out, with a plastic fork because that's what they gave you. But yeah, it's 20-year anniversary of 9/11. Now that I remember that.
That's perfect. Well, Paul, this has been a great conversation, wide ranging, lots of stuff we've gotten into. Really appreciate your time this afternoon. Just want to pass it back over to you. Provide any last thoughts, any parting shots that you would put upon the crowd as they're trying to think about their post-military life.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I'll leave you with, you're built for this. You're built for this. Like, especially if you've served in the last 20 years, it's been dynamic. It's been a world of change. And I think that is the new normal. I think that the new normal is a battlefield, if you want to use that extension, right? Whether it's COVID or the economic environment or infrastructure or whatever business you're getting into, it's going to be really dynamic. Something like COVID is happening that will turn everything upside down. And you are built for that. You were trained for that. You self-selected for that. And you can uniquely navigate, whether it's a one-person food truck or a Fortune 500 company, you are well trained and well positioned to do that. Once you get to that point, you got to work your ass off. And I would argue you have to work your ass off more than you did in the military, because it is less predictable and you're going to have to be more resourceful. But if you dig deep into the great resourcefulness that has created, this country, but also every generation of American veterans came home and became entrepreneurs and did well in business. Fred Smith started FedEx after serving in Vietnam. The stories are many, right? But World War II veterans and World War I veterans and Revolutionary War veterans that came home and then continued to make an impact in the business world. You can do that. It will be tenacious. I ask you to remember your brothers and sisters who've worn the uniform. They're not all rock stars, but find them and they will be ready for you. And remember them when you get up there, when you become Mark and he's the president of ESPN or something even better. Remember this community that helped make you who you are, and give back to them and give back to the young men and women who have yet to even join, because that's a part of your legacy. That is your community. And so I am extremely excited about every new veteran I meet, because they represent the great potential of this country. But it's hard out there. And it will be hard, but you are hard. And there are people like me and Mark and many others that have come before you. And if you reach out, I think you'll find, just like in the military, they'll help you get through it. America needs you right now more than ever. And I will tell you that America needs you out of the military even more than they needed you in the military. Because in the military, you're one of millions that are in the military. When you get out of the military, you're less than 0.5% of the population. So you will be the representative from planet military. And you need to represent that planet well, and know that there are other representatives of that planet that are ready to have your back and help you do great things.
Man, you got chills going down my spine right now. This is a fantastic way to end the episode. Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find out more about you?
Go to righteous.us. You'll find that all of our websites have the .us component, because we are an American-made company. We're building in America. We're hiring in America. We're run by veterans. And then you can find out information about Independent Americans and the firefighters and While the Rest of Us Die and everything that we're doing. We're creating a movement in the media, and we welcome you to join us. And I will tell you, go to anywhere you get your podcasts and subscribe to Independent Americans. But also, as a fellow podcaster, subscribe to Mark's podcast. If you're listening right now and you have not, subscribe. And since this is airing on or around Veterans Day, I challenge you to share it with 11 friends. Share it with 11 friends, write their names down, send them the link to what do you think, Mark? iTunes or Apple, or what's the best way for them to share your show?
So most people download on Apple Podcasts, but yeah, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, all the stuff. But yeah.
So if you enjoyed this content that Mark's been putting out for free for many, many episodes, help him build this business, because we need him to succeed. And when he succeeds, we all succeed. And I want to thank you, man. You're doing something that's really important. You're paving the way. And as a guy who, many vets that came before me created the GI Bill so that vets like you would come. And so it's like the fulfillment of the mission to see you out there doing well and inspiring other people. So I'm grateful for your leadership. And best thing folks can do is help amplify that leadership. And by default, they'll be amplifying all of us.
Well, hey, strongly appreciate that ask to the audience. But Paul, thank you so much for coming on today. And this has been an absolute pleasure being able to talk to you. Really appreciate your time and absolutely love all the different things we got into. Some great words of wisdom for veterans. I think really anyone who got the chance to listen to the show, even if you didn't wear the uniform, some good stuff in here for all Americans, really. So Paul, thanks for coming on, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch. All right.
My pleasure, brother. Appreciate it. Stay vigilant.
All right. Take care.